Hello everyone, welcome to Understanding Medical Parasitology with the Physio Tutor right here at Get Ahead Institute. So in this tutorial, we will be talking about Trichuris Trichiura, where we'll be unveiling the must-know key concepts or the must-know um, uh, 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 key points. So to start with, when talking about Trichuris Trichiura, it belongs to a topic under parasitology which has to do with helminths. So helminths basically they are divided into two main categories. We have those that belong to flatworms and we have those that belong to roundworms. So under roundworms, that is where we find nematodes. Then under flatworms, that is where we have cestodes and trematodes. But in this case, we will be considering nematodes. Okay, so in this tutorial, we'll be considering nematodes, but not all nematodes are going to be talked about in this particular tutorial, because even the nematodes actually they are found or they are considered to belong to when we're talking about classification of nematodes based on habitat. We have what we call intestinal nematodes, and we have what we call blood and tissue nematodes. So for those that belong to intestinal nematodes, they are further divided or categorized as those that are soil transmitted and those which are non-soil transmitted. Okay, so one of the key things, even before we dive deep into this particular tutorial, is that when it comes to nematodes, when talking about the life cycle of nematodes, man is actually the optimum host for all nematodes. Okay, so nematodes actually pass their life cycle in one host except for some species. Okay, so for those that need two hosts, vector insects and cyclops constitute the second vector. And nematodes, they don't divide or multiply in man. Okay, so now we'll be talking about soil transmitted nematodes under intestinal nematodes. So there are about four of, of these parasites that we can talk about in line with your syllabus. But we'll first begin by talking about this same Trichuris trichiura. So let's get into this. Okay, so when it comes to Trichuris trichiura, it is also known as a whipworm. Okay, whipworm. So this whipworm is thick posteriorly and then it is thin anteriorly. Okay, so talking about the habitat, actually, the uh, Trichuris trichiura is actually found in the large intestines, or it resides in the large intestines of man, specifically the cecum, the appendix, as well as the proximal end of the colon. Then when it comes to epidemiology, um, Trichuris tricula usually affects children. Okay, so it affects mostly children. Then this particular parasite is cosmopolitan. Now, quickly, let's talk about the life cycle. Let's talk about the life cycle. So, when it comes to the life cycle, it is very, very important that you get to understand exactly what is comprised when it comes to the life cycle of these parasites. Okay. Um, by the way, as you can see on this particular slide, is that with these parasites, the same Trichuris trichiura, is that we have the female, okay, and we also have the male. So this actually entails you that you must be able to know what distinguishes or what are the differences between these two, between the male as well as the female. What makes them be different? So that is very important for you to know, okay, because you can be asked in an assessment uh, how you can differentiate or distinguish these two. Okay, so back to the life cycle. So to start with, remember we already mentioned that when it comes to the host, humans are the only host to Trichuris trichula. Then when it comes to the infective form of this particular parasite is actually embryonated eggs. Embryonated eggs. Then for the mode of transmission, Trichuris tricula is usually transmitted by men, or we say males, usually children. Okay, so you find that men, usually children, they acquire this infection by Trichuris tricula by reason of ingestion of contaminated food and water which contains embryonated eggs. Okay, so now to summarize this particular life cycle is that number one, you must understand that the the embryonated the unembryonated eggs will be passed in uh, through feces. Okay, so we start from here. So we'll consider this as our first stage. Okay, this will be considered as our first stage where the embryonated eggs, the unembryonated eggs rather, are passed in feces. Okay, the unembryonated eggs are passed in feces, and when they are passed in feces, these unembryonated eggs, what they'll do is that they'll undergo development. Okay, so this development will occur in the soil. Okay, so when this development is taking place is that in the soil these particular eggs will develop into a two cell stage cell. Okay, two cell stage. Okay, but then it won't just end there. What will happen is that the cells will actually continue, okay, through this process of development. They will continue to divide. Okay, they'll continue to divide um, through what we can term as this continuation of division is what we call advanced cleavage stage. Okay, advanced cleavage stage. Okay, now for us to have these embryonated eggs as it is being shown on this particular slide, we have what we call embryonation. Okay, embryonation. So embryonation is just a process. So you'll find that these are unembryonated eggs which were released into the soil. They'll undergo this process of development, and part of this process of development has to do with embryonation. Okay, so the unembryonated eggs in this case, which were passed in feces, are usually not infective. Okay, so it takes about 28 days. It takes about 28 days for them to become embryonated. Okay, for them to become embryonated at about 25 degrees Celsius in warm and moist condition. Okay, so one of the requirements for this embrionation to occur is that we need a temperature of about 25 degrees Celsius in a warm and moist condition. Okay, so what will happen is that since they've passed this stage, now they've become embryonated eggs, is that they must then be ingested. Okay, they'll have to be ingested. Okay, so this stage, okay, this step there. Okay, so they'll have to be ingested when hands or food are contaminated with feces or fecal containing soil. All right, so you find that at this particular point, man will acquire this infection by ingestion of contaminated food and water which comprises of embryonated egg. Okay, so uh, that is um, the step where we are at. Now, the next thing that will happen is that they what will happen is that the eggs, after they've been uh, ingested, is that the eggs will they will hatch in the small intestines. Okay, so they will hatch in the small intestines. Okay, now this hatching in the small intestines on this particular slide is that after they hatch, okay, we are here. Okay, so they will hatch in the small intestine, and when they hatch, they'll release, or they will liberate larvae. Okay, they'll release larva. Okay, so now that larva which has been released, the larva will mature. Okay, and when it matures, what it's going to do is that it will establish, so those larvae will mature and establish themselves as adults. Where do they establish themselves? Remember, we talked about the habitat. Okay, so they'll establish themselves as adults in the cecum as well as the proximal end of the colon. Okay, proximal end of the colon. That is why here you can see it is written adult worms in large intestine, which can be the cecum or the proximal end of the colon. Now, after that establishment and maturation, 2 to 3 months, okay, 2 to 3 months, you'll find that the fertilized female worm will again do what? The fertilized female worm will lay an embryonated eggs again, as we can see here. Okay, so that is the life cycle of Trichuris trichiura. Okay, so we have man here and we have soil here. So in other words, we've talked about three key cardinal uh, parts when it comes to the life cycle: the host, the infective form, the mode of transmission, and how everything, how that transmission actually occurs. Okay, so that was it with the life cycle of Trichuris trichiura. Now let's talk about the pathogenicity and the clinical features of this particular parasite. So we must understand that most infected individuals, most of the individuals who are infected with this particular parasite have no symptoms. Okay, they have no symptoms. Others only have eosinophilia. Okay, and the incubation period of this particular parasite is 70 days to 90 days. The disease which is caused by this parasite is what we call trichuriasis. Okay, is what we call trichuriasis. Okay, so now in the clinical manifestations, okay, the clinical manifestations, or before we can talk about these common manifestations or symptoms, we must understand that in people with heavy infections, adult female worm gets buried in the large intestinal mucosa, which will end up leading to mechanical distortion and allergic responses by the host. And when that allergic response by the host takes place, you find that it leads to an increase in the number of macrophages. Okay, now let's talk about the common clinical manifestations of this particular parasite. So we have abdominal pain, anorexia. Okay, we also have trichuris dysentery syndrome. We also have iron deficiency anemia. Okay, iron deficiency anemia. Then we also have so this iron deficiency anemia is as a result of blood loss. Then we also have recurrent rectal prolapse. Recurrent rectal prolapse. So this recurrent rectal prolapse is due to heavy worm load in the rectum as well as malnutrition. Okay, but there is something that is worthy of taking note, which is very peculiar, is that with regards to trichuriasis, mixed infection may occur with uh, other parasites such as Ascaris lumbricoides, hookworm, as well as Entamoeba histolytica. Now, talking about laboratory diagnosis. So, for us to diagnose this particular parasite or this particular condition, it can be done through stool examination. Okay, it can be done through stool examination. So, stool examination actually gets to detect barrel-shaped eggs with mucus plugs at the ends. Then we can also conduct protoscopy. So protoscopy is there for identification of adult worm from prolapsed anus as well as rectum. Then apart from that, we can also utilize the measuring of the infection with regards to counting the number of eggs as well as counting the number of female worms which are expelled through deworming. We can also talk about the treatment. When it comes to treatment, these are the drugs that can be utilized, but they differ with preference or priority. Okay, so the first one has to do with mebendazole. Okay, mebendazole, or so if not mebendazole, we can actually use albendazole. Okay, so mebendazole or albendazole is safe and moderately effective for treatment. Okay, with cure rates of about 70 to 90%. Then we can also utilize ivermectin. Okay, we can also utilize ivermectin. So this ivermectin actually is safe, but it is less effective. Okay, so that was it with Trichuris tricula. Now let's consider one scenario question with regards to what we just talked about. Okay, so this is a scenario sample question. The question says a 24-year-old mother from Chasefu district of Eastern Province just brought her 3-year-old son to the outpatient department at Livingstone University Teaching Hospital for examination. When asked the reason for her visit to the hospital, she tells you that her son has a clinical condition that she does not understand. On examination of her son's anal region, okay, of her son's anal region, you observe the clinical presentation illustrated in the figure shown. So this is the clinical presentation that you have seen after the examination as a clinician. Okay, that is what you have seen as a clinician. Okay, so now these were just uh, this was just a statement. Now let's look at the questions. So reference is made to this particular uh, figure that has been shown there. Okay. So the question says, what is the name of the clinical condition? Not what is the name of the parasite, but it's saying what is the name of the clinical condition. Pause the video and answer. What is the name of the clinical condition? So this is what we call trichuriasis. Trichuriasis. Okay. Second question, what is the causative? What is the causative parasite of the condition you have named? What is the causative parasite of the condition you have named? You can pause the video and answer the question. Okay, so this condition is caused by Trichuris trichiura. Trichuris trichiura. The third question says, name five clinical symptoms associated with trichuriasis. Name five clinical symptoms associated with trichuriasis. Okay, so remember we mentioned that When it comes to asymptomatic, many people with whipworm infection may not experience any symptoms at all. Okay, so we might have mild to moderate symptoms. So when we're talking about mild to moderate symptoms, these might include abdominal pain, just like we mentioned when we were trying to elaborate on this particular parasite. We can have loss of appetite, we can have diarrhea, sometimes we can have even weight loss. Okay, but now in heavy infections, you'll find that abdominal pain is often described as cramps or even discomfort. Diarrhea can be mild or it can include blood. Remember, we talked about dysentery. Okay, so we can also have anemia. We talked about iron deficiency. Okay, we can have rectal prolapse. Okay, we can have rectal prolapse. I think so. I think those are enough. Okay, I think those are enough. We talked about recurrent rectal prolapse. We've talked about trichuris dysentery syndrome, where we can have blood or mucoid diarrhea, which actually resembles inflammatory bowel disease. Okay. Then the fourth question says, mention the drug you would prescribe. Mention the drug you would what? You would prescribe. So we talked about mebendazole or albendazole, but the priority should be mebendazole. Okay, that should be your priority, mebendazole, or you can say now albendazole, but mebendazole should be priority. Then the other question says, what preventive measures would you educate the mother's child on? What preventive measures would you educate uh, the mother's child on? So um, this we can um, you can talk about food safety. Okay, you can talk about food safety, um, which has to do with washing, peeling, or even cooking raw fruits and vegetables. Okay, because that is very much recommended, which as it helps to kill any eggs that may be present. Okay, any embryonated eggs of Trichuris trichura that may be present. Okay, can educate the mother on hygiene. Okay, on hygiene. Remember that this parasite can be ingested. Okay, and to ingest, usually someone has to use their hands. So if their hands have not been washed, okay, so educate the mother on hygiene, let her know the importance of regular hand washing, especially when it comes to after using the bathroom, okay, even before handling food, as this can actually help curb the transmission of eggs via contaminated hands. And not just that, you can also talk about waste disposal. Okay, so effective sewage systems as well as safe disposal of human waste, including avoiding the use of night soil as fertilizer. So these are also significant when it comes to prevention of the spread of whipworm eggs in the environment. Then lastly but not the least, um, I think this is supposed to be question number 6. Okay, so the question says, in the laboratory, how can you, so this is what I was talking about, how can you distinguish between the male and the female parasites? Okay, between the male and the female parasite. So in the laboratory, actually, we'll base our reference based on trichuris trichura. Okay, in the laboratory, the male and female trichuris trichura, which is the whipworm, can be distinguished or differentiated based on morphological differences, especially when we examine it under a microscope. Now, how can we differentiate them? When it comes to size, you'll find that the female, from that slide that I showed you, the female is generally larger compared to the male. Then when it comes to the posterior end, which is the tail, females have a straight posterior end, while the males have the posterior end is curved, or it is coiled like a hook, of which that is of great importance when it comes to copulation. Then we can also differentiate them based on reproductive structures. That is, on microscopic examination, you find that the female has a blunt tail with a visible vulva. Okay, and then usually it will contain numerous eggs in the uterus. Then for the male, it has a needle-like reproductive structure, okay, which may be visible. Then when it comes to egg production, I think this um, is the key identifier, because only females lay eggs. So the presence of eggs in the uterus during dissection is a key identifier. Okay, so by so doing, we would have answered the question. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.